Saul, and he was tormented by an evil spirit sent by the Lord. So the servants of Saul said to him, Please, an evil spirit from God is tormenting you. If your lordship will order it, we, your servants here in attendance on you, will look for a man skilled in playing the harp. When the evil spirit from God comes over you, he will play, and you will feel better. Saul then told his servants, Find me a skillful harpist and bring him to me. A servant spoke up to say, I have observed that one of the sons of Jesse of Bethlehem is a skillful harpist. He is also a stalwart soldier, besides being an able speaker and handsome. Moreover, the Lord is with him. Accordingly, Saul dispatched messengers to ask Jesse to send him his son David, who is with the flock. Then Jesse took 5 loaves of bread, a skin of wine, and a kid, and sent them to Saul by his son David. Thus David came to Saul and entered his service. Saul became very fond of him, made him his armor-bearer, and sent Jesse the message, Allow David to remain in my service, for he meets with my approval. Whenever the Spirit from God seized Saul, David would take the harp and play, and Saul would be relieved and feel better, for the evil spirit would leave him.
Okay, so this is a pretty good example, and certainly the meatiest example in the Hebrew Bible that we have. That David, it seems to have been, was a fairly accomplished musician, and that his abilities in that area seem to have been especially gifted, so that the Lord made use of it to drive evil spirits away from Saul, who was the first king of Israel, right? So something going on with that. Would someone else read 2 Samuel chapter 6, verses 14 through 16? It's a little bit shorter.
What chapter?
2 Samuel chapter 6.
And the verses.
Beginning at 14 and ending with 16.
Then David came dancing before the Lord with abandon, girt with a linen ephod. David and all the house of Israel were bringing up the ark of the Lord with shouts of joy and sound of horn. As the ark of the Lord was entering the city of David, Michal, daughter of Saul, looked down from her window, and when she saw King David jumping and dancing before the Lord, she despised him in her heart. They brought in the ark of the Lord and set it in its place within the tent which David had pitched for it. Then David sacrificed burnt offerings and communion offerings before the Lord. When David had finished sacrificing burnt offerings and communion offerings, he blessed the people in the name of the Lord of hosts, and distributed among all the people, the entire multitude of Israel, to every man and every woman, 1 loaf of bread, 1 piece of meat, and 1 raisin cake. Then all the people returned to their homes.
All right, thank you. So this one, it doesn't exactly talk about David playing any music, but this is not a sort of, he's not tangential to the scene. The context of the passage is that the ark of the Lord has been estranged and kind of away from the city, and David seems to be looking to make Jerusalem his capital city. And of course, if you're going to make a capital city, you're going to bring the ark and retrieve it from its location and put it in its new place as the center of Israel's life of worship. And so this is his initiative to do all of this. And the scripture's pretty replete with David's aspirations to build a temple and also he seems to be functioning as a leader of worship in this passage. Dancing before the Lord, making sacrifices, giving gifts, the gifts of worship to the people of God. And it's another warrant to say, David's not exactly tangential to the worship life of Israel. And whatever we want to make of that, to sort of claim that David absolutely had no role in authoring any of the Psalms, it goes against a lot of what the Scripture seems to hold out, at least that he was pretty centrally involved. And so that it's too strong to say that absolutely he could not have authored any of these. It is indeed possible. This is also a quote from the Dead Sea Scrolls. It's the manuscript is 11 QPS. And these are scrolls, and sometimes the Dead Sea Scrolls reflect the rule of the community and the viewpoint and their documents produced by the community. At other times, they collect prior resources within Israel. And this is one that it says about the Psalms. It says, "And David, the son of Jesse, was wise and a light like the light of the sun, and learned and discerning, and perfect in all of his paths before God and men. And Yahweh gave him a discerning and enlightened spirit." And says, "And he wrote psalms, 3,600 psalms, and other songs to be sung before the altar over the perpetual offering of every day for all the days of the year, 364, and for the Sabbath offerings, 52 songs, and for the offerings of the first days of the months, and for all the days of the festivals, and for the Day of Atonement, 30 songs. And all the songs which he spoke were songs in which he spoke were 446, and songs to perform over the possessed fort. The total was 4,050, and all these he spoke through the spirit of prophecy which had been given him from before the Most High." So some of that is, there are gaps in the psalm, and so I've sort of supplied or give gaps in the manuscript. So I've sort of assembled all of that into the translation. But it gives you some indication that there's at least a really, really old tradition that the Dead Sea Scrolls preserve, that David composed, thousands and thousands, 3,600 psalms alone, and then it seems thousands of songs besides. Now, we don't know how far back that tradition goes. That's the earliest record that we have of it, and that survives from the days just before Jesus and the disciples. But it certainly seems to be part of the lived memory of the ancient people of God, that David either authored some of these or was certainly as involved as any king could be in the worship life of Israel. And if he was, as 1 Samuel describes him and as 2 Samuel describes him, there's at least some credibility. So why should we take this as a claim of authorship by David as opposed to one of these other options? Well, we do have one other example that kind of gives us exactly what we would hope for. Could somebody look up for me Habakkuk chapter 3 and verse 1?
I have a question.
Mm-hmm.
Since there are supposedly several authors of the Psalms, Is the content very different depending on the author? Almost like, are they geared to a certain audience like some of the Gospels are?
Yeah, good question. And the answer is no, really, not really. Stylistically, of course, it's really easy to tell the difference between English authors by the prose. I can tell pretty easily if one of my students has cribbed a paper from the internet versus authoring it himself or herself. And the reason why is because, after all these years of teaching in undergrad institutions, I know about as well as an undergraduate can write. And sometimes they're just too developed in their ideas and too polished. Mm-hmm. And they don't resemble anything like I've come to experience in this particular student, and so you can tell. Well, that's also true of Greek. The Gospel of John, the Greek is really easy, almost elementary Greek. I'm not a Greek ninja, but I can pretty well muscle my way through Greek in John's Gospel. Paul is a little harder, and Paul likes subordinate clauses, and so sometimes it's a little bit hard to find out where the sentence is going. The author of Hebrews is dense and very difficult Greek. And then much later, Maximus the Confessor is still writing in the same, at least allegedly writing in the same Koine Greek as the Gospels and as Paul and the rest of the New Testament. But Maximus the Confessor is unintelligible. I one time got it in my head that I was good enough at my Greek that I would try and write a paper for one of my professors in a doctoral seminar, Dr. Steinhauser, and so it was the worst paper that I ever wrote in doctoral studies because I spent all semester trying to make heads or tails of the Greek. And I turned in the paper and I said, I know that this is a horrible paper. I wouldn't have given it to you except this. I'm out of time. Here you go. Make what you will of it. I'm not very proud of it. I don't have any confidence in my conclusions because he's really difficult, right? And so, that kind of fluidity that you experience in English is there in Greek. It's just not in Hebrew. And the reason why is Hebrew grammar is so elementary and easy, and it never breaks its rules. And so, where you and I would, they say that people who live in the north, the Eskimos, have 14 words for snow. And the reason why is because they have such an expertise with snow that, I don't know if that's true or not. But you sort of imagine Hebrews, every animal is either a big cow or a little cow. Sun, moon, stars. That's just very elementary, and the grammar is really, really simple. So you have to infer lots of things from context. This is the example, a really great one. That's a pretty common particle, and it gives you a preposition, but which one you use depends so much on context. And the problem with these titles is there's no context. It just says Le David.
Would you be able to tell if it were written by David or Asaph?
Nope, not at all. The Hebrew doesn't really change enough, and I would, would any of them maybe prefer to use certain words? Like some people, like inalienable versus unalienable. And could you tell that? Well, theoretically you could if you had enough of a sample, but the sample sizes aren't large enough to be able to tell even that. Yeah.
Besides the semantics of it, is there a purpose in knowing what the difference is, whether it's by David or by Asaph?
Yeah, well, only in so much as if we want to